Filing out some headlines about art and AI that came up recently. So just going to read them. Is music about to have its first AI #1 hit? From the BBC Music in 2019. We made our own AI art, and so can you. AI doesn't need human help to paint like Picasso. Actually, I'm going to talk to you about the system. And the last one actually is about an exhibition that I was in last week that opened at the Barbican about AI. This exhibition is proof that robots will destroy us all. Now, what's interesting is that you contrast these with the following quotes by Jazia Reichard, who in 1968 curated foundational exhibition Cybernetic Serendipity, where she presented mixes of works from artists and technologists, including interactive installations, robots, computer-generated art. We can see that basically since the beginning of AI in the post-war era, there's been, we can see that there is, you know, we're coming back to kind of the same questions after all these years. So Jazia said the exhibition was designed to dispel some of those prejudices which cause many intelligent people to believe that the computer is a threat to those whose intellectual abilities and creative powers may no longer be in demand, as the role is gradually taken over by AI machines. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that there have been constant interactions between AI and contemporary art over since the beginning of AI in the post-war era, and that these interactions are bringing questions and concern, at least in the general public, that keep resurfacing. Questions, for example, about authorship, the possibility and the possibility of artificial creativity. And as I believe we would all agree here, AI is a messy notion with a messy history, or rather messy histories. So most understand the relationship between AI and art as linked to the generation of art by machines, which would presumably put into question the authorship of the work. Many also seem to think that the use of AI for art making appeared only recently, that is something new and emergent. But it turns out that the use of AI in artistic production goes back to the early days of AI and cybernetics. So this is this piece is actually recently made the news last year because it was an artwork that was generated using generative adversarial networks by a collective called Obvious, which actually picked the code to do it on GitHub. So the code was made by somebody else, and there was all this controversy about like who's the real author of this work. And I think it probably wouldn't have been so much controversial, except for the fact that it sold for a lot of money, and then it kind of became a story of its own. So my presentation today is going to be framed within the post-World War II era and Western institutional context. And I will focus mainly on looking at the interactions between contemporary art, especially contemporary new media art and AI. And not so much at looking at the field of computational creativity, which is a subfield of AI that attempts to endow machines with creative properties. Although I will bring some examples from computational creativity as points of comparison. And I'll try to sketch a very rough overview of some of the core questions at the nexus between AI and art. There's much more than that. And it's very intricate, but I'll look especially at these questions of authorship, creativity, the problem of optimization and problem solving as applied to art making, objects versus systems, embodiment, and finally agency and materiality. And I will do so by bringing some examples from the real, from the art world along the way. So, so I said earlier when reading the news, the question of authorship seems to be very important, and a very important one when it comes to art. What you see here, the image on the right is was produced by a system developed by Harold Cohen over more than 4 decades, which was a program that was able to paint. So many are tempted to ask, okay, well, who is the author of a painting from Aaron? Is it the programmer, or is it the machine? But in the end, the question seems less interesting, at least to artists, than it is to lawyers and lawmakers. So, so for the arts, for artists, what seems more interesting is how AI can expand art practice and art forms. And if you would ask, actually, Harold Cohen made many claims about how he didn't think that his system was the artist. He thought that was not, it was kind of ridiculous, that he was it was just part of his approach to to painting. So the question of creativity has always been present in AI. Ada Lovelace herself had the point of view over artificial creativity. She believed computers would never be able to be creative. During the Dartmouth workshop in 1956, creativity was listed as one of the important areas to be investigated by AI. Yet on this question, artists and computer scientists seem to diverge in their approach to creativity. For example, if we compare the work of musician George Lewis with the work of pure computer scientists Todd and Lowe, on one side we see more or less an application of a traditional way to make AI, which frames creativity, in this case the act of composing scores, as a case of problem solving and optimization, in this case understanding the probability distributions of sequences of notes. This is very different from the approach that Lewis takes in designing his system Voyager, which was an improvisational music system that he developed in the mid-1980s. And it enabled improvisation between performer and machine in real time. For Lewis, the structure of the programming materializes and embodies the cultural, social influences of the author and his or her context. Very fruitful exchanges existed from the 1980s onwards between art and science at the fringe of AI in the fields of artificial life and algorithmic art. What you see here on the left is a piece by Carl Sims called Galapagos, where you had these virtual creatures that were evolvable. And in one of his famous installation, he had the audience act as a fitness function. So people would be able to choose which creatures they preferred, and then it would evolve the next generation. On the right, you see the world of William Latham and Stephen Todder's system, FormSynth, which allowed the artists also to create these kind of new shapes to explore these worlds. So these represents alternative to the problem-solving, top-down symbolic approach to AI that rather suggested open-ended, bottom-up emergent systems as a way to make art. So one of the other points I wanted to make is that, and this is related a bit to the Galapagos work by Carl Sims, where he actually used some kind of an optimization process in the making. But ultimately, what is given to see exists in a complex mathematical and visual space, which has been defined by the artist. On the left here, you see a study that came recently in 2017, where the scientists basically created a new approach to generate artworks based on some kind of generative adversarial neural network. And to make a very long story short, what's interesting is that their measurement was, so they trained the system on other paintings, and then they had the system generate new images, and then they asked people what they thought. Was that work created by an artist or generated by a computer? And interestingly, when they showed images from abstract expressionism, 85% of people rightfully said that these were made by humans. In the case of their system, 53% said that they were made by humans, so they sort of can say they passed the Turing test in that specific case. But what's even more interesting to me is that when they were showing works from Art Basel 2016, which were actually made by artists and were considered kind of the top examples of current contemporary art, only 41% people thought these were made by humans. So, on the right here, you see a piece by Kumar Miller, which kind of plays within this this idea of like this question of optimization, the question of value attribution. So in the mid-1990s, they ran surveys asking people what they like to see in a painting. And then based on these surveys, they created sort of like the best painting for, and they made that for different countries. So what you see on the right is their version of America's most wanted painting. So this reveals all the attribution of value is very complicated when it comes to art. It reveals how difficult it can be for artists to apply AI to art, because traditionally AI has been focused on problem solving and optimization, but art is precisely non-optimizable. There is no such thing as the best painting or the best song or the best joke. So where is really the locus of creativity? Is the property of the object itself, or rather is it that it is in the relationship, in the context that is established between different agents that intervene in the production and consumption of art? So these questions were actually already sort of addressed in the 1960s after abstract expressionism, with practices of performance, land art, and conceptual art, which led to the abandonment of, in a way, of the results of objects of art in favor of processes and systems. And you have, for example, the early works of cybernetics art, like the work of Gordon Plasek, where you had these robots that were trying to communicate between one another, and these sort of different kinds of models that came up of systems aesthetic, behaviorist art, and behavior aesthetics that were really focusing on the question of the behavior and the relationship of systems. The fact that art has been historically very much interested in human experience, the senses, and the embodiment is also very important in the arts. This question of embodiment has been also increasingly important within AI and cognitive sciences. Artists since the early age of cybernetics and AI have explored self-organizing, non-teleological, embodied robotic systems whose performance in the world pushes the boundaries of art and music. What you see here is Cis-Point on the left, this early cybernetics piece by Nicholas Schuffer, dancing with human dancers. And on the right, this project called, well, one of the pieces of the project called The Three Sirens, which was a robotic improvisation band by Nicola Baginski, which used neural nets. And these systems represent in many ways experimental, artificial, and active systems, that is, self-organized embodied systems that define their own world through their interaction with their environment. They thus challenge traditional models of cognition, such as cognitivism or connectionism. So finally, my last point will be about agency and materiality, and this brings us back a little bit to this question of authorship. And I think that for artists in general, authorship is like, the question of authorship is not as much as important as the relationship between the use of the autonomy of the system as part of their art practice. So you have a continuum between autonomy and control, where some people prefer, like, are ready to allow more autonomy to the system. Like, for example, John Cage, who said, like, you know, let sounds be themselves, as opposed to someone like Xenakis, who would use the system to generate material, but then make a choice in the kind of the final decision. And I'm going to end with this piece by Anna Riddler, which I think is really, really telling, where she used generative adversarial networks that she trained on a database that she made herself. And actually the database you see on the right is a piece of its own. It consists of 10,000 pictures of tulips that she took, and she had to actually go to the Netherlands and buy those tulips. And so there was really this kind of like very expensive and long and process that's very that's more akin to craft than art in a way. And then she trained these systems on she trained this neural network on these systems to try to generate different kinds of tulips. And there was this, she describes this process as something that's very material. And I think to end that if there is something that the arts can contribute and have contributed to AI, for me it's really that art as offers a set of alternative practices to approach AI that are much more engaged with the materiality of the processes, and that allow some kind of revelation process over things that are yet unintelligible. Thank you.